October 17, 1929, 6:23 a.m., a police officer stops his patrol car. Something in the roadside ditch catches his eye. Looks like bloody rags. He almost keeps driving. Almost. But something makes him walk closer. The smell hits him first. Blood. Dirt. Death. Then he sees it. Not rags. A body. Face beaten beyond recognition. Throat slashed ear to ear. 50 stab wounds covering the torso. This man had been left to die like garbage. Officer James McGuire had seen dead bodies before. This was New York in 1929, murder capital of America. But when he knelt down to check for identification, something impossible happened. The chest moved. One shallow breath, then another. This man, whoever he was, shouldn't be breathing. Nobody survives this. 50 stab wounds, throat cut, hours of bleeding in a ditch. Medically impossible. But the man in that ditch wasn't nobody. He was Salvatore Lucania. And what happened to him that night would give him a new name. A name that would echo through history. Lucky Luciano. And the men who tried to kill him, they just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Because some people are harder to kill than others. To understand why someone tried to murder Salvatore Lucania with such brutal efficiency, you need to understand the war tearing New York apart in 1929. The Castellammarese War. Old World versus New World. Sicilian tradition versus American innovation. On one side, Joe the Boss Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano. Old guard bosses who believed in the Sicilian way. One boss rules. Everyone else obeys. You're either Sicilian or you're the enemy. Blood feuds that started in Sicily before anyone was born still mattered in New York. On the other side, a new generation. Salvatore Lucania, Meyer Lansky, Bugsy Siegel, Frank Costello. Young men who saw organized crime not as a blood feud but as a business. They didn't care if you were Italian, Jewish or Irish. If you were smart and you could make money, you were in. Sal, as his friends called him, was 32 years old in 1929. Born in Sicily, raised on the Lower East Side. He'd been arrested twice, served time once, built a reputation as someone who was smart, strategic, and absolutely fearless. But more than that, Sal had vision. He'd been meeting with Meyer Lansky for months, planning something revolutionary. A commission, 5 families, equal votes, disputes settled through discussion instead of bullets, democracy for gangsters. It was brilliant. It was modern. It was everything the old guard hated. Salvatore Maranzano hated it most of all. Maranzano was 43 years old, Sicilian-born, barely spoke English. He'd studied to be a priest before turning to crime. He saw himself as a Caesar, building an empire the Roman way, through conquest and absolute authority. And Salvatore Lucania, to Maranzano, Sal was a threat. A young upstart with dangerous ideas who refused to show proper respect to his elders. By October 1929, Maranzano had decided Salvatore Lucania had to go. What nobody knew, what would only become clear later, was that Maranzano had ordered a hit, not a quick bullet to the head. Something brutal. Something that would send a message to every other young gangster with big ideas. This is what happens when you forget your place. October 16, 1929. 10:47 p.m. Lower East Side, Manhattan. Sal walked out of a meeting with Meyer Lansky. They'd been discussing their next move. How to convince the other young bosses that the commission idea could work. How to survive long enough to make it happen. A black Packard pulled up to the curb. "Mr. Maranzano wants to see you." Sal recognized the driver. One of Maranzano's collectors. But Maranzano hadn't scheduled a meeting. And the 3 other men in the car, all staring at him with dead eyes, weren't there for conversation. Sal's hand moved toward his waistband, but one of them was already out of the car. Gun drawn. "Get in, now." Meyer Lansky, still in the doorway behind him, started forward. Sal shook his head slightly. "Don't. If they wanted him dead right here on the street, he'd already be dead." This was something else. He got in the car. The Packard pulled away from the curb, not toward Maranzano's office in the Bronx, toward the Manhattan Bridge, toward Brooklyn, then Staten Island. "Where are we going?" Sal asked calmly. Nobody answered. That's when Sal knew for certain. This wasn't a meeting. This was an execution. The drive took 40 minutes. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were the engine, the tires on cobblestone, and Sal's own steady breathing. He could have fought, could have tried to jump from the moving car, but Sal was always a strategist. He was analyzing, calculating. 4 armed men, one of him, in a moving vehicle. The odds were bad, better to wait, see where they were taking him, look for an opening. The car crossed into Staten Island around 11:30 p.m., drove to the southern shore. Isolated beaches, no houses, no witnesses. The car pulled off Highland Boulevard onto a dirt road, stopped, out. One of them said, Sal got out. The night air was cold off the water. He could hear waves in the distance. The 4 men formed a circle around him, one of them the biggest one. A thick-necked enforcer Sal recognized as Tony Fabrizio stepped forward. Mr. Maranzano has a message for you, Lucania. You don't respect your elders. You think you're smarter than everyone else. You think you can change the way things work. I'm just trying to make money, Sal said calmly. Same as everyone. No, Tony said. You're trying to make yourself boss, and Mr. Maranzano can't allow that. Tony's fist came out of nowhere, caught Sal across the jaw. He went down hard. Then they were on him. What happened next lasted maybe 15 minutes, felt like hours. They beat him with fists, boots, brass knuckles, broke his nose, shattered his cheekbone, knocked out 3 teeth. Who else is planning with you? Tony demanded. Who else is part of this commission idea? Sal spat blood, said nothing. Another kick to the ribs. Something cracked. Answer the question. Still nothing. They weren't trying to extract information. Not really. They were making an example, showing what happens to ambitious young men who forget their place. After 10 minutes, Sal stopped moving, stopped responding. His face was a mess of blood and broken bone. Get the knife, Tony said. One of them pulled out a knife. 8-inch blade. What happened next was systematic, professional. They stabbed him 50 times. Chest, stomach, back, legs, each wound precise, designed to bleed him out slowly. Finally, Tony grabbed Sal by the hair, tilted his head back, and slashed his throat, ear to ear. He's done, Tony said. Dump him in the ditch. They dragged Sal's body to a roadside drainage ditch, threw him in like garbage, walked back to the Packard. One of them looked back. Should we make sure? Look at him. He's got 50 holes in him, and his throat's cut. He ain't coming back from that. They got in the car and drove away. Time, 2:23 a.m. The job was complete. Salvatore Lucania was dead, except he wasn't. For 4 hours, Salvatore Lucania lay in that ditch, bleeding, unconscious, clinically dead by most medical standards, but something in him refused to quit. Call it will, call it spite, call it luck. At 6:23 a.m., police officer James Maguire found him. Found the impossible. A body that shouldn't be breathing, but was. The ambulance rushed him to Kings County Hospital. The doctors couldn't explain it. 50 stab wounds, severed throat, hours of blood loss. By every medical metric, this man should be dead. But Salvatore Lucania's heart was still beating. They operated for 6 hours. Stitched up 50 wounds. Repaired his throat, though his voice would never be the same. Set his broken bones. Gave him 14 pints of blood. And somehow, impossibly, Salvatore Lucania survived. He woke up 2 days later. A detective was sitting by his bed. Mr. Lucania, I'm Detective Brennan. I need to ask you some questions about what happened to you. Sal's throat was bandaged. Speaking hurt. But he managed to rasp out 4 words. I don't remember anything. Mr. Lucania, someone tried to murder you. We found you in a ditch with 50 stab wounds. This was attempted murder. Professional. Organized. You're telling me you don't know who did this. I don't remember. You don't remember being kidnapped. Driven to Staten Island? Stabbed 50 times? Sal looked the detective in the eye. I was drunk. I fell. You fell. Yeah, I'm clumsy. Detective Brennan stared at him for a long moment. They both knew it was lies, but they also both knew how the streets worked. Sal wasn't going to talk. Not to the cops. Not to anyone. Because on the streets, you handle your own problems. All right, Mr. Lucania, Detective Brennan said, standing up. If you change your mind, you know where to find me. I won't, Sal rasped. After the detective left, Sal lay in that hospital bed staring at the ceiling. 50 stab wounds, throat cut, left to die in a ditch. But he wasn't dead, he was alive. And that meant Maranzano had made a mistake. A fatal one. Because you don't try to kill a man and fail. If you fail, you've just created an enemy who has nothing left to lose. The newspapers got hold of the story within days. Gangster survives brutal assassination attempt. Miracle recovery for stabbing victim. But it was the New York Daily News that gave Salvatore Lucania his new name. Lucky to be alive, Gangster survives 50 stab wounds. Lucky. The name stuck. On the streets, people started calling him Lucky Luciano. Not Sal. Not Salvatore. Lucky. And Lucky wore that name like armor. Because it wasn't just about surviving. It was about what the survival meant. Lucky Luciano had looked death in the face 50 times. And death had blinked first. Salvatore Maranzano thought he'd eliminated a problem. Instead, he'd created a legend. Lucky stayed quiet for 2 years. Recovered, planned, built alliances, got stronger. In 1931, the Castellammarese War was still raging. Meyer and Maranzano were tearing the city apart. Lucky made a decision. He was done with the old ways. Done with old men fighting wars that started in Sicily before he was born. April 15, 1931. Lucky invited Joe Meyer to lunch at Nuova Villa Tamaro restaurant in Coney Island. During dessert, Lucky excused himself to go to the bathroom. While he was gone, 4 gunmen walked in and shot Meyer to death. Lucky came back from the bathroom, looked at his dead boss, and walked out. The perfect alibi. Maranzano thought he'd won. Declared himself boss of all bosses. But Lucky wasn't done. September 10, 1931. Less than 2 years after the Staten Island assassination attempt. 4 men dressed as police officers walked into Maranzano's office in the Eagle Building Trust Company. They shot Maranzano 6 times and stabbed him 4 times. When police asked Lucky about Maranzano's murder, Lucky said, "I don't know nothing about it." Same words he'd used in the hospital 2 years earlier. That day, Lucky Luciano didn't just kill Maranzano. He killed the entire boss of all bosses system. Within weeks, Lucky convened the first meeting of the commission. His vision of organized crime. 5 families. Equal votes. Democracy. The old system died. The new one was born. And it was born because a man named Salvatore Lucania refused to die in a Staten Island ditch. Lucky Luciano lived for another 37 years after that night. In 1929. He'd go to prison in 1936. Get deported in 1946. Die in Italy in 1962. But the name Lucky stayed with him forever. And every time someone asked him about it, he'd tell the same story. The night in 1929, the 50 stab wounds, the slashed throat, the survival that shouldn't have been possible. They called me lucky, he'd say. But it wasn't luck, it was will. You either got it or you don't. The men who tried to kill Lucky Luciano that night thought they were eliminating a problem. They thought they were protecting the old ways. Instead, they created the man who would destroy those ways forever. They gave Salvatore Lucania a new name, a new identity, and a reason to tear down everything they'd built. October 17, 1929. The night a man survived the impossible. The night Salvatore Lucania died and Lucky Luciano was born. And the lesson? Some people you can't kill, not because they're lucky, because they're too stubborn to die.